The historical memory of ancient Macedonia is a victim to the heroic stories of Philip II and his son Alexander. To be fair, it's difficult to examine the Macedonians before Philip's reign, due to a lack and reliability of historical sources. Still, the Macedonian state is an often overlooked topic. So let's see how this major power emerged on the world stage. What can we assert about the Macedonian kingdom based on the limited knowledge available? The origins of the ancient Macedonian monarchy date back to around the early 7th century. This we can assume from analyzing a list of Macedonian kings cited by Herodotus. The Macedonian royal family referred to itself as the Argead dynasty, derived from their early royal capital, Aigai. Thucydides claims the royal family to have originated in Argos, a city in the Peloponnese, though this is one of two versions of their origin, and there's nothing to verify its truthfulness. At the same time, it demonstrates a desire to link the early history to the Greek world. Later Argead kings, such as Alexander I, reaffirmed their Hellenic ancestry, going so far as claiming to have descended from Heracles and Zeus, legends of Greek mythology. The second tradition states that they originated from the highlands of Illyria and Epirus. Since this region was very inhospitable, they descended into the western fertile plains of Macedon, which they conquered and subsequently settled. The latter account seems likely, since the Macedonians spoke a northwestern Greek dialect, which seems to confirm them migrating from there to the east. A native of the Chalcidian Peninsula, adjacent the Macedonian heartland, Aristotle was a proponent of the Macedonian state monarchy. He lists Macedon as an example of a kingship monarchy. In his works, he distinguishes between two kinds of monarchy. Quote, "Tyranny, usually established and maintained by force, is a dishonorable rule, whereas kingship is a position of merit, either by virtue or birth or good deeds." In the same passage, he also criticizes the political institutions of the Greek world, describing tyranny as the combination of the last form of oligarchy and of democracy, making it liable to the errors that spring from both forms of constitution. But how did this government, that at one point so thoroughly dominated the ancient world, evolve? There were several institutions that were developed over time and had varying influence on the royal family. We should understand these institutions as traditional, lacking constitutional legitimacy. The primary authority of the state rested on the king, or basileus. This title used to refer to a tribe's leader, so all the noble families used it. But this would change over time, as it would be exclusively used by the royal family to assign the supreme leader over all, Macedon. To the Greeks, who by the 5th century had long abandoned their kings, the Macedonian state must have seemed extremely archaic. In some forms, many of the city-states still had a basileus, but this position had long been stripped of much of its power, only serving as a relic of their past. Some have compared the monarchy of Macedon to Sparta's diarchy, but contrary to Macedon, Sparta, much like its Greek neighbors, had developed a formal constitution, distributing power to various offices of the state. One important aspect of any culture's early development was a clearly defined tradition of succession. Any civilization without it at their leader's death, faced instability, civil war, and even the collapse of their realm. Although the Argead system of succession was hereditary, it was by no means exclusively marked by the custom of inheritance by the firstborn. The ruler of Macedon was understood to be, as Aristotle put it, a heroic warrior, so it was important to have demonstrated military skill. For that reason, princes vying for the kingdom sought out war. The king would usually select his favorite for the throne, but this was by no means a guarantee for an easy succession, as there were usually several ambitious male descendants with a claim. Additionally, if the king had enacted unpopular changes to the kingdom, powerful nobles would frequently back another claimant. To establish his rule, the future king had to eliminate his rivals. This would often involve a purge of any other potential successor. A famous example of a troublesome Macedonian succession is the ascension of Archelaus I in 413 BCE. To come to power as illegitimate son of Perdiccas II, he ended up murdering his half-brother, his cousin, and his uncle. Seeing the power of the Macedonian nobility, it is of importance to recognize their role in the state. So how can we understand the relationship between the aristocracy and Argead royalty? The north, contrary to the densely packed city-states of the mountainous south, was still largely semi-urbanized. So it mainly consisted of small cities and rural villages. Early on in the history, the Argeads conquered several tribes around their settled territory. They now governed a largely decentralized group of tribes that had to be assimilated into the Macedonian culture. Although Macedon asserted nominal overlordship, local nobles retained their authority. So practical administration may have lain in the hands of the king, but the viability of his decisions often depended entirely on the readiness of the nobility to acknowledge his position. The most influential nobles at any one time thus constituted an informal council of state. They would advise the king on legislation, support him financially, and recruit the local levy during times of war. The power of local lords posed a recurring problem for the king. Over its history, the kingdom often faced internal division, especially during times of war. The region of Upper Macedonia, for example, was notoriously difficult to control, as neighboring factions, like the Illyrians, Pannonians, or Epirites, often had close relationships with noble families of the mountain tribes. This meant that foreign powers could use Upper Macedonia as a diving board for invasions into the Argead territories. It was thereby also possible for them, through their connection to Macedonian nobles, to indirectly influence the royal family. To remedy the problem of foreign intervention, a system was developed to closely bind the aristocracy to the royal family, thereby strengthening the hold of the Argeads over their domain. This institution was the royal court. In what ways did the royal court connect royalty to the aristocracy? The Macedonian court, which sat at the heart of the kingdom, set the stage for the indoctrination of young aristocratic men into the distinctive Macedonian elite society. 3 prominent positions were created for this very purpose. These positions included, first, the Basilikoi Pates, or the royal pages, second, the Summator Felices, or bodyguard of the king, and the unofficial prominent appointment as a hetairoi, or companion to the king. The first step in the life of young nobles, around their mid to late teens, would be to leave their homes and start their service as pages at the Macedonian court. At first their assignments included humbling tasks, usually reserved for slaves, such as taking care of the king's horses, accompanying him on the royal hunt, and tending to any other personal needs. This constituted a kind of rite of passage for the pages. In time, their training included all sorts of elements. They were prepared specifically for future positions such as governors or military leaders. The court hosted many prominent Greek intellectuals that would instruct this mix of young royals and nobles in all branches of liberal education. The succeeding king would thereby grow up alongside his eventual high officials, forming close bonds and strengthening the loyalty of the elite to their king and his successor. Furthermore, this institution gave the king greater control over his nobles, as the pages to some extent served as hostages, ensuring their father's good behavior. The position of royal bodyguard stood out as it not only granted social mobility to the aristocracy, but also to commoners, insofar as it was based not primarily on social status, but rather on the degree in which a soldier excelled in military service. The guard usually consisted of a few hundred strong elite unit of the Hypaspes, or shield bearers. This honorary title would often be assigned by the king, for example in cases of heroic actions taken during a battle, or because of the influence enjoyed with the monarch. Although their activity in peaceful times mainly consisted in the protection of the royal family, this drastically changed during times of conflict. On campaign, the individual members of the bodyguard would be assigned high-ranking positions, especially in the infantry units, dwindling down the number of officers personally protecting the king to usually not more than a handful. Which brings us to the third group, the companions. This group held a contradictory position. It was on one hand the least formal of the three institutions, but on the other hand exerted the most influence with the king. It constituted the inner circle of the king, his closest advisors. Usually, this small group was made up of the young king's peers, the friends a future king would grow up along at the royal court. At the king's ascension, these peers would already have assumed roles in the administration of the state, as part of the bodyguard, or as public officials. The king would at this point recall these close companions to serve as his personal counsel. Because of their influence, the companions held the most prestigious titles in the military, as for instance the hetairoi at some point morphed into the king's elite cavalry unit. Internal rivalry was common among the group of companions, as they were all vying for the king's favor. The king was not limited to who he could authorize into his inner circle, so anyone the king befriended, even outsiders to the court, could be counted among the companions. A noteworthy example of an outsider joining the companions is Eumenes, son of a Thracian noble, and whom Philip, after noticing his skill at wrestling and hearing of his bravery and intelligence, added to his advisors. The final institution of the state was the public assembly. For the Greek cities, or polis, the state developed into an entity that bridged the divide between the ruling class and common people. So was there any way for common Macedonians to get involved in the political process? Yes and no. There were two customs that involved the public in stately matters: the assembly of the people and that of the army. Both did not hold any real power, and were used as more of a tool for the king to influence his people. The monarchy held absolute power, although there were historical exceptions where popular support was essential for its rule. The assembly of the people, held whenever the king desired, usually involved only the inhabitants of the capital, early on Aigai and later Pella, excluding the majority of Macedonians. The assembly was held in times of peace, and its purpose varied, but the main goal was to influence public opinion. The king would spread propaganda, call for festivals, justify a war, or rationalize policy. During war, at any stage of the campaign, the monarch could call for the army to assemble. As a warrior king, his rhetoric served as inspiration for his soldiers. He often portrayed himself as their comrade in arms, leading them to glorious victory. In combination with a godlike self-representation, he strengthened his men's loyalty. The late Macedonian kingdom, through the conquests of Philip and Alexander, profoundly changed the ancient world, ushering in what we refer to as the Hellenistic Age. Although the Argead dynasty would quickly vanish after the death of Alexander, the successor kingdoms that partitioned the conquered territories would continue many of the Macedonian customs of state, solidifying its legacy in the emerging Hellenic world.